Welcome back to Comics Are Dope. I'm BJ Kicks, and I'm super excited to present to you guys today a really fun conversation with writer and artist Tony Fleecs. We had a great conversation just about his career, the sort of runaway success of Stray Dogs, which is the series that I discovered him on. Discovered sounds like a strong word. I don't mean it in like a Columbus way. It just means the first time I heard of Tony Fleecs, it was because of Stray Dogs. But anyway, we talked about that. We talked about just his career so far. We talk about the project he's working on now, including a follow-up to Stray Dogs in Feral. So it's really, really fun. We even get to bond over our love of cartoons and the sort of cartoon renaissance of the 90s. So really, really fun conversation. Before we jump into it, though, I do want to remind you guys, if you're watching this or listening to this on release day, then March 21st, 2024, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we are doing our 10,000 subscriber celebration live stream on YouTube. I'd encourage you guys to listen and tune in. It's going to be a really fun time. Haven't gotten to do a live stream in a while, so I'm really, really excited for it. So join me, youtube.com/@comicsaredope, or just search Comics Are Dope on YouTube, and I'll see you guys at 8 p.m. Now let's jump into this conversation. Well, guys, my next guest can actually be considered a friend of the show. We've chatted here in the comments. I've covered one of his books before, long before we met each other, and even mistaken his name for his brothers somehow. So let's welcome to the podcast, Mr. Tony Fleecs. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem, man. I'm happy to have you. Yeah, it's funny. So I guess my introduction to you was Stray Dogs. And Stray Dogs was a book that I picked up. I didn't know anything about it, except that everyone was clamoring for that issue 1 kind of out of nowhere. And so lucky for me, people at my LCS love me and were like, hey, we already set aside a copy for you. I'm like, oh, great. And so I open up this book and it's these Don Bluth Disney looking dogs. And it's just the cutest looking book. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I remember the shop, she's a part owner, but the clerk at the time, she's like, don't show this to your daughter. I know she loves animals. She's going to want to read this. Don't let her read it. And I was like, that's a weird warning. Okay. And I read the book and I'm like, oh, this is definitely not for kids. I love this book. Just the sort of twisted horror or more suspense. It reminded me of that movie, Disturbia with Shia LaBeouf.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But it's just like, hey, this cool stray dog gets adopted. And it's like, what if our owner is a serial killer? And everybody's like, hey, you're crazy. And we just watch this story unfold over the next 5 issues. And that book ended up making my best of 2021 list. It's one of the few series I actually stayed current with because we actually had a baby around the time issue 1 came out. She was in that. Well, thanks. And but yeah, so one of the books that just jumped straight to the top of the reading pile every month. And I really enjoyed it. And now we're here talking about a sort of successor in Feral. But I guess before we do, how did you feel about the response or the reaction to Stray Dogs?
I mean, I was mostly just surprised. I mean, we knew that the book was good. We really liked it. You know, when we were making it, we were like, this is cool. I hope people, read it. I hope people find it. But we weren't anywhere expecting for the thing to sell as much as it did or become, as sort of talked about as it was. Or we just basically first of all, when COVID hit, we didn't expect anyone to read it at all. We were just like, this is a disaster. Nobody, the shops aren't even open anymore. Like, this isn't going to come out. And then slowly they started to sort of figure that out. And then the book sort of came out right at this perfect time where everybody was at home. I feel like they had stimulus checks, interested in getting into like sort of falling back into the hobbies that they'd had. People that had read comics before sort of came back to it, and people that hadn't read comics before sort of found them. There's a whole bunch of new readers came in then. So we just had this book that was sort of like just different enough to catch people's attention at the perfect time. And it was really the sort of thing that, like having just gone through promoting Feral, it's, like you can't repeat the same thing again because just the way that the world is like, it's everything that happens in the world sort of trickles down to your comic book when you're putting
Mhm.
a comic book out, so it was a horrible time for the world at large, but it was a very good time to put out a comic book that was just slightly off left to center like that, like slightly off kilter.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were just shocked. We were of course happy about it, but Trish or Tone and none of us expected it to be successful like that. And it was, sort of a super bright beacon in a really dark time. Like, we're stuck at home,
Mm.
people are dying. I got divorced at the same time, and it's
Jeez.
like everybody was going through awful shit. And then this book was sort of like the only thing going that was just really, never really let us down.
Right. No, and I mean, and that book went crazy. I mean, I don't know whose idea the horror movie variant covers was, but it was like every issue, suddenly you want the second, third, fourth printing, and you got to collect them all like
Yeah.
Pokemon or something. It was that book was an event.
Yeah, it was wild. It was sort of a like opportunity meets ambition type moment too,
Mm,
because really they would show up and say, "Hey, we need a cover for a second printing," and it would be Tuesday and they need it by Wednesday, or it would be Monday and they need it by Tuesday. So it was very fast turnarounds, and
mm,
those covers aren't simple like that. At least you know what you're starting with when you're doing
yeah.
those homage covers, like. But we would have to really crank those things out. But every time we did it right away. And so they just came out, like we weren't going to let that moment pass and have us, still have, be holding the ball, like
Right.
we were very ambitious right when that happened.
Nice. Now, you write, but you also are an artist as well. Um, I guess take us back a little bit. How does that journey start for you, and how do you decide you want to focus on both as opposed to one or the other?
Well, when I first came into comics, it was both writing and drawing at the same time. And I feel like that's sort of the trajectory that I'm on is eventually I'll sort of just get back to that.
Hmm.
Um, But being like in my early 20s and making independent comics, I was really inspired by a lot of the people that were around me in like message board, like in the message board scene. A lot of them were making these sort of like quick print on demand, self-published comics, and,
Hmm.
I was just really inspired by seeing them. Just I always thought you had to have permission to make a comic. Like I
Hmm.
always thought I'll break in, but the idea of breaking in was like so monumentous. And it's like you have to, uh, I had like this list of things I had to do. And it was like, get a letter printed in Wizard with the letter art, and then get a
Hmm.
cover printed in Wizard. And then people will notice me. And then I can send something into Marvel and Marvel will be like, oh, now you can draw X-Force or whatever.
Hmm.
But when the early 2000s, when message boards were popping off, it I sort of saw people making comics and not really breaking in, but just sort of like, I mean, I guess there were people breaking in. There were people that would make their own comics and then would get jobs doing comics for other people. And to me, that just seemed like, it really uh like democratized the whole thing. Like it wasn't just the way to get into comics wasn't just through these few small places that I'd always thought that it was like you could just make your own thing.
Hmm.
So I wrote and drew my own comic. And then I just quit my full-time job because I had no responsibilities beyond myself. Like I wasn't married, I didn't have kids
Hmm.
or anything. And I just started making comics, but I would do, like lettering jobs or coloring jobs or literally anything. I'd do, draw sketch cards that they would put in like
Hmm.
Marvel cards. I did that grind for a while. But it was like 6 tough years of having, scattershot work just here and there. And then I got the job drawing My Little Pony. So it just sort of happened. I'd always drawn more than I wrote, just because like I always drew as a kid growing up. So I ended up drawing for the first, you know, whatever, 10 years of my career after I got that My Little Pony job. Like I was just mostly drawing. Sometimes I would write. And then I worked in a studio with a bunch of other comic artists and writers and stuff. And my buddy Dennis was like, he came to start working in the studio with us. Dennis Culver, he does Doom Patrol at DC,
Hmm.
did Crone and a bunch of other stuff. But he was just working on his own creator own stuff besides the regular jobs that he had. And
Hmm.
I saw him doing that, and I was just hustling, making like Star Wars or Rick and Morty or whatever at the time. And I was like, oh, right, I forgot. I'm supposed to, I'm supposed to be creating my own stuff. Like it was almost like I got so wrapped up in whatever part of my career I'm in. I feel like I get really wrapped up in that, and so I was just
Hmm.
wrapped up in making deadlines and doing licensed comics and stuff. And I forgot I was supposed to make my own. So I started like got notebooks and I started like pulling out old ideas I had and dusting them off and started thinking about stuff. And I made Time Shopper, and it was around that same time that I had the idea for Stray Dogs, and then I made that. You know, I got Trish and Tone and the gang on it, and we made that.
And so you're working on all these licensed comics. When you're trying to break into the industry, I'm assuming you're taking any job that's offered. But what was it about that type of work that appealed to you? And is that the type of stuff you wanted to do or that you envisioned doing when you were trying to break in to begin with?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've always drawn really cartoony, and
Mm,
so I ended up getting the job drawing My Little Pony. And when I got that job, like everybody that knew me was like giving me shit, and just like
mm,
brony and all this stuff. And but even then, when I got the job, I felt like, oh, this is cool. Like this seems like they're gonna do a bunch of these. Like I sort of had based on what was going on at the company that I was talking back and forth with them,
mm,
and then when the first issue came out and sold like crazy, I was like, I bet I could just do this for a while, like.
mm,
And the way that they responded to me hitting deadlines like I do at the company, and then the way that they would just kept giving me work, they just sort of like, do you want to do this next? Do you want to do this next? And I was like, I fucking will do all this stuff. Like
mm,
I had been like broke for years, just doing like getting jobs here and there and sort of like piecing things together. When I got that licensed work, when I got work on My Little Pony and all the stuff that came after that, it was like I was like I made it. I felt great,
right,
And
right.
so it wasn't necessarily that was something that I was aiming towards my whole career, but it was
Mm,
when it happened, I was like, oh, this works. I can do this. I draw like this anyway. Let me do this. And it ended up being like a place where I could just sit for years and make comics and get good at making comics.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and now your work it's varied, right? Like you've got Back to the Future, Damage Control, Battle
Yeah.
Pug, just going through credits, Miles Morales, of course, My Little Pony, Vampirella. Like you've done work on just about everything and every type of character. Um, what what stories do you enjoy telling most through your art?
I mean, I like doing these like with Stray Dogs and with Feral, with Uncanny Valley, and with like all the creator owned stuff that I'm doing.
Mm,
I like doing stories that seem familiar to look at them. And then when you read them, you realize that like, oh, this is different than, it's the stuff that looks like something you recognize, but then is completely different.
got you, got you. Did
That
I,
seems that's like a little vague, but that's kind of what I'm into. I don't know. That's a difficult question.
nah, I mean, it makes sense. The answer makes sense, right? Like, because when you open, like you said, when I open Stray Dogs, it's like it looks like I know what I'm getting, but the story goes in such an unfamiliar place, or at least for the setting. And so there's like this cognitive dissonance, and you kind of have to wade your way through. And by the time you're like, this doesn't make sense, you're like, I love this. And so you're already hooked.
Well, so much of comics is like using the images to you're using the images to tell the story the same way you're using the words, but you can also use the images to misdirect people.
Hmm.
or to manipulate people. And so like when you're telling a story that you want to have surprises in it and stuff, like just on the whole, these books, Feral and Stray Dogs, because they look like they're not frightening or violent or whatever,
Hmm.
your brain, when you're reading them, gets relaxed, and
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, this is nice. I like these guys. And you're like, you identify with the characters because you've watched cartoons your whole life and you're like, I understand what this is. And that way, when we do decide to do something horrible or frightening or whatever,
Hmm.
it will hopefully catch you more off guard than if it just was in, like if Jay Lee drew it or if,
Right.
like Ernie Wrightson drew it or something where it looks scary already.
Hmm.
So that's sort of the thing that I'm on right now that I like doing the most is sort of taking these things that you feel like you know what they are and then making them into something else.
Got you. And so we've talked about Stray Dogs, but let's get into Feral. What's the basic premise of Feral?
So Feral is a story about three indoor cats that get lost in the middle of the woods during in like a massive nightmarish rabies outbreak. So it's basically a zombie story with cats in it. Like it's if these cats get bit, if they get scratched, they get turned into these sort of mindless, shambling, violent, creatures. And so
Mm,
we wanted to do something as different from Stray Dogs as possible while still like staying in the same, recognizable world.
mm,
And so this one is sort of like the opposite number for Stray. If you like Stray Dogs, you'll like this too, but it's not going to be all the same beats and all the same moves and stuff.
right, right. And so nice. So, and this is the same creative team completely, right?
All the same people. The only difference is um, my buddy Dennis that I mentioned before, who
Mm,
writes Doom Patrol and a bunch of other stuff. He's editing this book, so we brought in somebody to help me keep everything on track and
mm,
help focus me because in between Stray Dogs and this, I took on a million more jobs, and
right.
like we've been making Feral for a couple of years now, just sort of like from start to from like pitching it to actually we've got a bunch of issues piled up and ready to go, but
Mm,
just being able to focus on that while I'm doing all this other stuff, right? In Army of Darkness or Uncanny Valley or Local Man or any of these other things that I'm working on, I needed somebody to help me focus. And Dennis was always somebody that I would show the scripts to when I was working on Stray Dogs.
mm.
So he was like, "Why don't we just do that, professionally? You can pay me, and
Nice.
I'll send emails for you and stuff." Like that sounds great. But yeah, same team, and Trish and Tone on the first series. Tone Rodriguez did sort of like backgrounds. We called it layouts, but he was drawing like pencil backgrounds, and Trish would ink over it. And on
Mm,
this book, Tone is doing full backgrounds where he inks everything. And so Trish is drawing over top of that just the dog or just the cats and the animals and stuff.
mm,
So it has a lot more detailed, sort of like richer, textured backgrounds.
mm.
Which really, when you see it, when you see like the woods and all the places that these cats find themselves, it really feels foreboding and dark because it is just like so detailed and so crazy.
Got you. I imagine that helps like with just the sort of animated style of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that was we did that in the coloring the first time around and in the line art too. Like we did pretty detailed backgrounds and pretty simple characters. But in the coloring, Brad Simpson would always color the main characters flat, like no shadows
mm,
on them, no rim lighting or lighting or anything, just like flat colors so that they would look like animation cells. And
mm.
so this one we're doing the same thing, but the backgrounds are just so detailed that you're like that it really crackles, it really stands out.
Nice. Now, how soon after or how long after the success of Stray Dogs do you say, hey, let's go at this again from a different angle?
But we knew we wanted to while we were still working on Stray Dogs. We um like Stray Dog sales started to tick up in like issue 5 of like the
Mm,
very last issue. Uh,
mm,
but we knew that it was a closed, like a finished story going into it. There was no real way to extend it and we didn't really want to. We liked the idea of having just like a story that was nice and complete,
Mm,
and we had wanted to do these short stories that sort of focus on all the dogs, sort of like an annual, or
mhm,
like I sort of thought about it like Darwin Cook did that. He sort of went back to New Frontier and just did like a few other little short stories and that like
mhm,
issue. Want to do something like that. And we had talked to Image about it when we were pitching the book. And then when Stray Dogs took off, they were like, yeah, you can absolutely do that. Let's do 2 issues. And so we did Dog Days. But we knew as soon as that was over that that was pretty much it. Uh, and so we started talking about like how can we keep, because we loved working together and we were really happy with the outcome, like we
yeah,
liked the product that we were making. And so we started talking about like, well, obviously let's figure out something to do with cats, and so we started thinking about it, and it didn't come together super quickly just because, like I said, like we didn't want to repeat the same thing over
mhm,
again.
yeah,
So it took a while, but I feel like I keep getting like Facebook message or memories, they pop up and they say
uh-huh,
3 years ago this Stray Dogs thing happened. I'm always just like, God, that looks crazy that it's 3 years.
right,
But I'm happy we finally got it out now because if it was 4 years, I feel like the moment may pass.
for
Hopefully the
sure.
moment may pass.
Right. So, Feral is actually out next Wednesday as we record this, the 27th of March. Feral issue 1 is out. How long is this series?
No, it's ongoing. The
Oh,
plan is for it to just keep coming out. That was one of the ways that we wanted to make it different than Stray Dogs. Was Stray Dogs had this one antagonist,
mhm,
and so it's sort of like once you deal with that problem, there's no reason to come back for more Stray Dogs. So when we were cooking this thing up, the idea of having something that wouldn't just be as simple as like they get out of one scrape and then
mhm,
it's all over. Like this is an ongoing issue with this rabies, and so it's going to be like it starts out small, and we're in the point of view of these cats, and we're sort of focused on that. But as the series goes on, we'll sort of get glimpses of like, oh, it's not just here. Like this is a big thing that's happening.
wow,
So yeah, hopefully it'll go on for like it feels like uh, foolish to plan for things, but hopefully like
mhm,
50, 60 issues. Todd
nice.
McFarlane was going around on podcasts talking about how Image Comics don't go over 50 issues. And
Mhm,
I feel like that's a challenge we can accept, like
right. I mean, look, like, I feel like you can make it work with a zombie book, right? Like, there's precedent there at
there
Image.
sure is.
So let's just go 190 issues. Why not?
Yeah, sounds great.
So, but like you said, right? You've been busy. You're not just doing Feral. You've got quite a few other things in the works. They just announced, I want to say, not too long ago, Uncanny Valley.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about this book?
So it's from Boom Studios. That one just had pre-orders finished up yesterday.
Mm,
And so the first issue of that comes out on April 10th. Um, and it's me and Dave Wachter, who right now is doing Punisher,
mm,
but also did like Planet of the Apes and
yeah,
Ninja Turtles, ton of Ninja Turtle stuff. Do you know Dave?
I don't know him. I read his Planet of the Apes with David
Oh yeah,
Walker.
yeah, he rules. He's super good. I actually know him from way back in those message board days I was talking about. Like he was one of those people that was making his own indie like print on demand comics at that time.
Wow.
So we sort of have we worked together a couple times on real small stuff, but we've been friends and just sort of like both having a career alongside one another, but not really crossing over too much. This is the
Mm,
first time we're doing like a big project together. But it's a story about a kid named Oliver who's a 12-year-old, and he's going through that time in your life where you feel like you don't fit in, you feel like you're always out of place, and he really
mm,
just wants to be accepted. He has a single mom, and she's a traveling nurse, so they move a lot, and he just never can really. He never feels like he's a part of anything.
mm,
In the first issue, he finds out that maybe that's not all just normal. Like maybe the reason that he feels out of place is because he meets for the first time his grandfather, who's a cartoon character. And
Mm.
so he finds out that he's part cartoon and he has to go on like this journey with his grandfather because these other cartoons are out to get him. And so it's like a coming of age story
Mm.
slash Roger Rabbit slash Percy Jackson, but it's drawn in a way just like we do in Stray Dogs, where the cartoon characters look very different from the real people and the backgrounds and stuff.
Mm.
And Dave's really doing an incredible job of like the real people that he does are really painterly and sort of have
Yeah.
like pencily style, and then the cartoon characters just look like just like cartoon characters. Like they really
Right.
vibrate on the page.
I mean, just looking at the cover, right? Like everybody's got their own sort of style.
Yeah.
It's almost like, gosh, just lost. It's like a multiverse, I guess.
Yeah,
Like
like a
just all
Ready
these
Player
different,
One type thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is really cool. Um, so, and then the grandpa looks like Yosemite Sam.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's no hiding that. The whole time writing it, I would say, just like when I was writing notes or outlines or whatever, I would always just say like the Yosemite Sam guy, before I came up with what his name was.
Mm,
Uh, but yeah, he's definitely got that energy. A
nice.
little less ornery, but still just as rootin' and tootin'.
Very cool. So the idea of blending sort of a cartoon world and a real world, right? You've mentioned Roger Rabbit, but where's that inspiration come from for you? Is that it?
I mean, yeah, it's a lot of Roger Rabbit. It's a lot of like I grew up like obsessed with cartoons and animation. I
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be an animator for, before I decided I was going to make comics. It was like I was going to either make comics or make animation. I
Mm-hmm.
went to college for animation, and while I was there, I sort of got like I graduated, but the whole time I was just like, I don't think this is it for me. This is different than what I thought. I
Mm-hmm.
would watch like, documentaries or TV specials, The Wonderful World of Disney or whatever, and it would be
Mm-hmm.
just like old guy, I guess guys that look like me now, and they would be like looking in a mirror next to their desk, and like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
funny faces and stuff. And
Yeah.
that's what I want to do. I want to wear like Hawaiian shirts, ride
Mm-hmm.
scooters at work, make funny faces. But then I got to animation school and it was like, all right, here's 3D Studio Max. This is how we build a cylinder. And it was just seemed like I had to go a very long way before I got to the part where I could, make funny faces.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into comics. I sort of leaned that way, but I've always been obsessed with cartoons. And I grew up the oldest of five kids. And so even at the age when I should have, like where I might have grown out of cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
all my siblings were still just in cartoons. And so
Right.
we were just like constantly surrounded by them. But when Roger Rabbit came out, I was obsessed with it. I was
Mm-hmm.
like 8, 9 years old. I remember it was an early VHS that we had, and I just watched it constantly. Like the idea that there could be cartoons and real people together in the same thing was just so fascinating to me. And it's so, it's all wish fulfillment. Like
Mm-hmm.
you just think about like what would it be like to hang out with a cartoon? What would it be like to be a cartoon? In that movie, like Eddie Valiant sort of like jumps around and does cartoon stuff, and Judge Doom like is half cartoon. It's just like so much like just really like fertile imagination stuff when you think
Mm-hmm.
about it. Like there's just so much crossover and stuff. And so yeah, that was very inspiring to me. I said a bunch of times in other interviews that when I came out of Roger Rabbit, I thought like that's how movies are going to be now. I'm just like, of
Mm-hmm.
course, now that we've crossed this barrier, movies used to be in black and white, and then they figured out color, and then they were all in color. So now
Right.
that we figured out how to put cartoons in these things, they should just all have cartoons from now on. And
Right.
then none of them did anymore. Like there were hardly any cartoons ever. There's Space Jam happened, and
Mm-hmm.
like Cool World, and there's like maybe like 5 times it happened.
Yeah.
And so it was always very disappointing to me that we didn't have just like a whole multiverse of cartoons and real people together in movies.
Right. No, it's funny because I was a cartoon kid, but like my house was the Disney house. My mom bought like every Disney VHS.
And yeah,
And then my cousin, they lived in a house across the cul-de-sac from us. And their house was the Don Bluth house. Like they had all of the non-Disney cartoons.
crazy.
So we would like trade back and forth, do sleepovers and stuff. But
Yeah,
like, if it weren't for Space Jam, I don't know when I would have seen a live action movie for the first time.
really.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. My mom was I thought we were going to be on the same path. So my mom was definitely one of these Disney moms. Like she had
Mhm.
all those clamshells. She would get like the little porcelain figures at the Disney store and stuff. She loved all
Yeah.
that stuff. But we also had Fievel and Land Before Time and stuff like that. But
Mm.
we weren't allowed to watch certain stuff. We were raised religious.
Mhm.
So there was certain stuff that they were like that you can't do that. So like Ghostbusters was off limits. Simpsons
Yeah.
they wouldn't let us watch. So it was a lot of sneaking around.
Yeah. 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 And my cousin had none of those restrictions.
Yeah.
So that's where we got all that stuff, the
Yeah.
contraband, if you will. But but yeah, no, my mom, she swears up and down her house is worth like $1 million now because she's got her VHS still.
Yeah.
She's like,
Right.
I'm gonna put this on eBay, I'm gonna get rich. But anyway, yeah, no, I love the idea of, bringing cartoons into the real world. But also just kind of like never leaving the world of cartoons, right? Like there's something magical about that animation period, like the sort of the Disney Renaissance period,
Yeah.
and when Don Bluth is out there trying to compete, and we as kids just get all this really cool stuff,
Yeah.
and never have to like look at the real world, so to speak, in the 90's and 2000s. So I love just
We get into a little bit of that in the book as it goes on. A lot of it is like it's sort of like magical realism. Like it's just
mm,
like, oh, the cartoons are real in the real world. It's not like Roger Rabbit where they're actors,
mm,
cartoon actors that play the cartoons on TV. Like these are just they're real people, and we've been seeing their adventures, through magic or whatever.
wow.
But eventually we do get into a little bit of that sort of like the obsession, the sort of like childlike wonder about cartoons and sort of
Mm,
we touch on that too. But yeah, that time was crazy. The we really did I don't know how old you are, but that 90's animation run was unparalleled. Like it was just
yeah.
like hit after hit after hit after hit. And they were all so good that like even ones that weren't as good were still pretty good. Like Pocahontas, still pretty good,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Like,
What's funny, my wife and I, we were just watching Pocahontas like last week. These white men are dangerous.
oh, you got these kids. I was like, how? What? What?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've got, my daughter will be 3. She might be 3 by the time we finish filming this, but
Perfect.
she'll be 3 tomorrow. And then, I got a 13-year-old, but my in-laws have like never not had a toddler in the house.
Oh, wow.
Like, because by the time they were empty nesters, their kids had kids and it just keeps
Yeah.
going. So my wife has seen like way more cartoons than I did. Like, for me, like I can remember like kind of the first half of Disney Pixar stuff, but she's on like Meet the Robinsons and like all this other stuff that I'm like,
She knows Bolt and stuff.
yeah, all of it. And I'm like, what? Why are you still watching cartoons?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, my little brother was born when I was 18, so. But yeah,
Yeah.
lots of cartoons. But yeah. So is this planned to be an ongoing as well, or do you see an ending for this series?
There's an ending for it. It's solicited as 6 issues, and we're hoping that it goes longer than that because like the ending is further out than six, but
Mm,
the way comics are right now, they're sort of conservative about, launching things and not wanting to overextend.
yeah.
So I feel good about the way the numbers went yesterday. I'm not sure. I'll find out sometime this week, but we're hoping to extend it to do at least 12, and
Mm,
then there's room after 12 for it to keep going. But it's a story that gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes. Like every every issue, we sort of meet new cartoon characters and we introduce new cartoon like Oliver has these sort of like things start happening to him, almost like when mutants manifest their mutant abilities. Like
mm,
he starts to show these cartoon signs and powers and stuff.
mm,
And so as the series goes on, like every issue, we sort of introduce new ones of those, and it sort of like builds and builds and builds.
mm.
So hopefully we go on for a little while. There's definitely there's a big ending, but if it's a complete failure, there's also a very sweet, nice, little 6 issue ending as well. It'll either be a huge epic or just like a very like heartfelt and adorable, 6 issue thing.
How difficult is it managing that, right? Like knowing the story you want to tell versus the story that the market can support in a moment.
It's definitely, I mean, this is a new experience for me. Actually, um, because I'm writing Army of Darkness too, and on
Mm,
both of these, like I had this story. Are you growling at me? Okay. On both of these, Army of Darkness and this one, I wrote them as 12 issue things. Like I outlined them as a big 12 issue story.
mm,
And on both of them, you want me to let you out? Is that what you? On both of them, well, on Army of Darkness, they said like you got to hit a certain amount if we want to do all 12 of these, and we hit
mm,
it, and so we're doing all 12 Army of Darkness. And a similar thing happened on this with Boom. But if this were an image book, they have much less, um, like if you're like they have much less of a financial stake in the books. So if
mm.
you want to just lose money on a thing, they'll let you do it for until they start actually losing money.
Right.
So it's sort of a new experience for me, having the story just sort of be like, fingers crossed, we tell the whole thing. I feel pretty good about it though. Like the the response I've had from the first issue and the way Boom has sort of been behind it this past couple of weeks leading up
Mhm.
to this final order cutoff, I feel okay. I don't know. It's weird. It's definitely weird. I don't know how to. I'll let you know in a week how I feel about it. If it's
Got you. Yeah, I mean, if it's anything like Stray Dogs was, right? Like issue one will come out and people are like, oh snap, this is a thing. And then they'd be off to the races. But
fingers crossed. Yeah, I would love it if everything was like Stray Dogs was. That really went great.
so speaking of Army of Darkness, right? So Army of Darkness Forever, number one, I have an issue right here.
Yeah.
This isn't my issue. This is officially a plug. If you're watching this on release day, we're doing our 10,000 subscriber giveaway
Oh,
tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. And Dynamite submitted a prize pack. So somebody is going to go home. Well, you'll be home anyway, and this will come to your door weeks later. But we got a cool cover of Army of Darkness Forever, number one. And there's some other Dynamite goodies in this little bundle. They sent it to me a couple weeks ago. I don't remember what all was in here.
let's see what we got.
So we got Army of Darkness Forever number one, and I don't know who's on this cover because it's not a
That's,
Justin Greenwood cover.
that's me.
Oh, nice, very cool.
It's your guy.
We've got 007, Philip Kennedy Johnson. That's a
That's
pretty
me too.
cool cover. That's you too.
Maybe they sent you just a Tony Fleecs pack. Let's see.
Did we? Now here's a Peach Momoko, Vampirella, Dracula, Unholy. So that's cool. And then we got Garbage Pail Kids,
Not me either.
Mad Balls versus the Garbage Pail Kids, and then
Still good though.
this Immortal Red Sonja cover.
That's rad too. That's also not me.
That's very cool. So listen, we'll just pretend I pulled all this out just for Tony. And it's just these two books right here,
That's
this
right.
007 cover and Army of Darkness Forever. So yeah, shout out to Dynamite for sending this prize pack over.
That's
And
awesome. So you're at 10,000 subscribers?
we're at 10,000. We might be at 10,400 today.
Man, congrats.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It's been cool. Like we had like this big surge during the pandemic while I was like spending all my stimulus money.
Yeah.
And now I've had to be a bit more restrained and an adult. So growth
Got
has
that new
slowed
kid?
down. Yeah, exactly. Now she wants things of her own. So
How many do you have to get before you get one of those YouTube plaques? Was that 100,000?
100,000.
All right, well, let's get that.
Yeah, well, it'll take us another 30 years at this rate. But hey,
I'll
works
send
for
a
me.
prize pack myself if you get to the 100,000.
Nice.
All
I'm
Tony, please. Maybe some people Mocha.
very cool. I'll hold you to it.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll find your email address and be like, hey, does this still work?
Are you still at Hotmail?
Right. I mean, the fact that it's survived this long, I mean, hey,
I'm gonna write. I feel like I'm, at least halfway through my life. Hotmail's held on this long. You can keep going another 40, another 35 years.
Very cool. And so yeah, so you've been busy, right? We've got Uncanny Valley on its way, Pharaoh's on its way, but along the way, you've also been doing Local Man.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me a little bit more about Local Man.
So Local Man's me and Tim Seeley. We both write it. We both draw it. It's a story about a guy who was a former 1990s Image Comics superhero. So like
Mm,
imagine like Youngblood or Wildcats or Freak Force or one of these, like extreme 90s super teams.
hmm
And he now it's 30 years later, and he's sort of been fired and canceled, and he has to move home with his mom and dad in the Midwest. And he just lives in this small town where everybody hates him because they're all sort of like disappointed that he wasn't what they thought he was going to be.
hmm
And he doesn't know what to do with himself. And then people start getting murdered in his small town, and they all seem to have some sort of connection to his superhero past. So
hmm
he's not supposed to use his superpowers or his name or any of this stuff, but he starts looking into it anyway. Tries to figure out like if he can be a good guy without being like a full-on superhero. Like if he can still
hmm
help people without, you know, wearing shoulder pads and like the headgear and all that
hmm
type of stuff. So every issue is a flip book. It has the one side that takes place in modern times
hmm
in Farmington, Wisconsin, and that's drawn by me. And then you flip it over, and it's got a flashback to his sort of like superhero past, and that's drawn by Tim Seeley every month. And we're about to, on the same day that Farrell comes out, Local Man Bad Girls comes out, which is the like a an annual, basically like a
hmm
one shot that goes in between the second and third arcs. And then right now we're working on issue 10, uh, which will come out in May, I believe. I don't know. I'm exhausted, but yeah, issue 10 will start the third arc of Local Man, and it's going to be a big one. We're really excited about it.
Nice. Now, the other work that you've done in the past and stuff we've been talking about, even the creator owned stuff, there's like a sort of childlike nature to it, at least from the art
Yeah.
standpoint, right? But Local Man is kind of decidedly more mature.
Yeah.
What was the reason for that?
I don't know. I think the subject matter had a lot to do with it, and
Mm,
the sort of way that we were tackling this book. Tim Seeley and I were sort of using this format and this idea as a way to sort of like work through some dark stuff,
mm,
like the world was in a dark place. Him and I both had gone through divorces around the same time.
mm,
And so we were just sort of like working out all that sort of like disappointment and
yeah.
grief and all that stuff, and sort of putting it in this wrapper of the sort of disappointment that this guy feels that he's not the hero that he thought he was going to be. Like he's
Mm,
not. He didn't live up to the potential that he thought he had. And so just by way of that, like the story sort of leans dark. And also I feel like maybe from having, I mean, Stray Dogs is dark, Feral is
mm,
very dark, but they look sweet and adorable. And I feel
right.
like this one, it looks dark and and is dark. Although it still has like a shiny, 90s flip side, like it still has
Mm,
the sort of candy coated part to it that we love to do. But yeah, it is I always say it's hard to promote because it's just like well, it's like Youngblood, but with more sorrow and regret.
mm,
If you like Wetworks but wish it had more sadness,
mm.
that's what this book is.
Well, listen, man, it sounds promising.
People
But
like it. It definitely is very well reviewed, and the
mm,
pros are really on board for it. Like a lot of our peers and contemporaries are big fans of this book, which is very nice because it does seem like it's just such a it's a weird book, but it is like everybody that reads it really seems to get into it. So it's rewarding in that way that we put this very bizarre thing out there and people go like, that's my favorite book. So that's nice.
yeah, and I mean, I think so much of comics kind of has to be written for general audiences. So it's refreshing when it's like, this speaks to me and what I'm going through. as an adult, or maybe places I've been in the past. And it's not sugar coated.
For sure.
It's right there.
Well, I think it's one of these things. I always felt like if I would, I never thought I wanted to do a um, creator-owned superhero comic because I
Mhm.
always feel like that's such a well-covered genre.
Yeah,
Like there's two whole companies that every week put out like 50 comics about superheroes,
right.
and they are very successful at it. And so it's like if you're gonna do one, you really like I didn't want to do one unless I really had something unique to say and something that I wasn't gonna be able to do at one of those. Like when I not to throw shade, but like whenever I see somebody and they're doing like their Batman story or something, just
Hmm.
a different character, I'm always just like, just get hired to do Batman,
Right.
like
Yeah.
and so I sort of hold myself to that too, where this has to be something that I couldn't just do if they hired me to write like, Wildcats at DC or something, like
Hmm.
so so we do push it real hard. Like it gets very bizarre, it gets very dark and yeah, but people seem to still be hanging on. So that's good. People are in for the ride. And the numbers just went up oddly on this last book that we solicited, which never happens.
Mm.
So it's like for a long time it was just like we're making this for the audience that we have, and it's just enough that we sort of make money on it. But
Mm.
the last one we solicited, the numbers ticked up a pretty decent tick. So we'll see if it was a blip or if it
Mm.
was just because Tim drew very sexy covers for it, or we'll see.
Listen, it was the comic shop stimulus package. So, so you've got at least three arcs planned for Local Man. How
Yeah.
far do you see that story going?
I mean, it could go for a long time. It also we could wrap it up, you know, we could wrap it up at this one if it was like, I feel like we're getting to a pretty successful place for the guy, but the character is so, like, we have such a good feel for the character that it's like, as long as we don't kill him, we can keep doing this guy forever. And
Mm.
also, there's all this time in between, too, where like, we show these flashbacks to the 90's, but then
Mm.
all these stories that we haven't shown yet. And so part of us is like, what if we do Local Man for, these three arcs? And then what if we do like a third gen story? Like third gen's the
Mm.
super team that he was on. What if we do like a third gen miniseries or like try out different formats for this and see?
Mm.
So yeah, that's the cool thing about Image and about creator owned stuff, is that we can just sort of like make it as short as we want, like Stray Dogs, or we can keep
Mm.
it going as long as we want. It's just a matter of, what we got time for and if it continues to make sense, financially.
For sure. So, that's a great place to segue into this question, right? So you talk about just differences between creator-owned work and licensed work, and even like some big two stuff, right? Our mutual friend, the late Curtis Skipintosh, was a huge proponent of indie comics, like whether it's flea market comics, web comics. Like that man was always putting me on to something. These posters behind me, he got them from Ramon Villalobos at some Comic Con and was like, "Hey, I was just thinking of you," because basically it's all my favorite cartoon characters
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and comic characters wearing sneakers. So Miles is in the Air Max or Jordan ones. Raphael's got Air Maxes on, and Batman's got like Jordan boots on.
I
So
bet
it's
he
like really
got
cool
those
stuff.
at I bet he got those at Stockton Con. That's my guess.
Yes, that is
That's where he
exactly
would
where he
share
got
this.
those.
Yeah.
So, um, but so in honor of Curtis, right, his love for just indie and creator owned stuff, I would love it if you would shout out some, whether it's creators or stories that aren't yours that you think are worth reading.
Oh yeah. I mean, all the stuff I like is
Mm.
creator on stuff, it seems like lately. My my two like most recent favorites are one's very popular,
Mm.
Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees by Patrick
Mm.
Horvath. Incredible, like super good comics. I think the fourth issue comes out this week. I'm very excited about it. That thing, I mean, obviously the guy who made Stray Dogs likes this, teddy bear serial killer comic.
Right.
Uh, but it is about it's like a children's book that has a serial killer in it as the main character and told from her POV, and it's really great. And then I love Black Cloak by Kelly Thompson and Meredith McLaren. It's like a fantasy slash futuristic slash police procedural.
Mm.
So it's like if you took Dungeons and Dragons, but you took it from the time, like from the medieval times, and pushed it all the way up to like the future, like say 50 years from now, where
Mm.
like cars maybe don't fly, but they hover at least, like,
Mm.
and, but then, so we're in that world. There's like kings and queens and fairies and mermaids
Mm.
but then also there's a police force and there's been a murder. And so this is just told like a street level detective story with these like kingdom cops
Mm.
in this fantasy world. Very like all of that sounds like such a barrier to entry where it's like a lot of things you know about,
Mhm.
but smashing them together seems like it would be impossible. But the artwork is so charming and so like inventive. And then the way Kelly Thompson writes characters is just so natural feeling and just feel like it's the first page you read of this comic, you're just like, oh, I know exactly who these people are. I know
Mhm.
what their relationship is. And so that I really love that. That's my favorite. That's coming back soon. And then I just read today Terry Moore's Parker Girls.
Mhm.
And that's just like it's set in the world of Strangers in Paradise. Like it's got characters from Strangers in Paradise, but it's basically just like a one-off, um, like sort of revenge slash not spy thriller, but like the Parker Girls in the world of Strangers in Paradise are like this sort of like web of I don't know, they're not like call girls, but they're just like influencers. Sometimes they do have sex with people for money, but it's more like they are women who are placed in places of importance to be there to influence things and to
Mm.
like uh make things happen. And you can hire them out, like you can hire a Parker girl to come and be watch this thing and get this desired result, almost like Inception or something.
Got you.
Um, but this one, some of the Parker girls start getting killed, and so all the Parker girls have to like spring into action and find out who did it and why, and then also get revenge. And it's like while Strangers in Paradise is like this big ongoing like romance slash adventure slash intrigue thing. The things he's been doing for the past few years, he'll do like these 10 issue stories where it's like they did this Strangers in Paradise anniversary thing, and they did this thing 5 years later, and then now they did Parker Girls, and they'll be just like a very intense. You can tell the kind of movies that he likes or the kind of
Mhm.
stories that he likes because he's doing these like very concentrated, but also still with the relationships and the humor and all that type of stuff. So that was I read that today. I really like that. Um, I really like the Deviant,
Mhm.
James Tynan's Christmas serial killer comic. A lot of serial killers. um, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I read mostly creator-owned stuff, so I don't. It's hard to nail down just one.
Got you.
But hopefully that's four. That's pretty good.
Yeah, nah. Listen, I leave every episode of this show with homework and a buying list. So
Yeah,
this one's no different. Um, but yeah, man, that's really awesome. So
man, I miss that Curtis, dude. I feel like the last time I was supposed to come on here was for Local Man, and
mhm.
like we were messaging back and forth with it, and then not to bring the room down, but like he was like, "I just got to go into the hospital. I got to take care of something," and then that was it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was definitely what was going on. Curtis is the reason this podcast exists. He was just like, I'm just gonna hit up all my friends and like we're gonna do this podcast. So Justin was the first guest, and
I watched that one.
yeah, it was a really fun conversation, and I'm glad like he's not suffering anymore.
Yeah.
His family's good. I just got his album just came in the mail a couple weeks ago. Um, oh, you didn't hear about the album?
No, what? Tell me about this.
Let me grab it. Let me grab
Yeah.
it. So Curtis had like an electronic music project called the AV department. It's Skip and Tosh. He's performing as Skip and Tosh with the roving Jewel, who's like a lo-fi beat producer. And so they released this album. It all felt so real. It was like a Bandcamp thing. It's on Spotify. Like you can hear it
Yeah.
on Spotify now. But when he passed, this some label, I'm not familiar with the label, but they decided like to do a limited pressing. And so all the proceeds went to his family to help with medical expenses and stuff.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I was able to get myself a copy. And they actually put an extra track on this. It's a 5-track album if you find it streaming, but they put a 6-track that Jewel produced, and it's got Curtis doing vocals on it. Like, I don't know if they cut up an interview or what. I actually haven't been able to bring myself to listen to this yet, so I
Sure.
haven't heard the extra track. But yeah, no, really cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna check that out on Can you send me a link after we get off?
Yeah, for sure. I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, the project is cool. I used to play it. It was the drive to school music because it's a lot of ambient stuff.
Yeah.
I can like listen to it and have a conversation with my kids at the same
Yeah.
time, so it was cool.
Yeah. I'll write to that. That sounds great.
Yeah, no, that's dope. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I miss Curtis as well, and so I had to make sure we paid homage in that way since we both knew the man.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. He was great.
For sure. Well, look, Tony, I really appreciate your time. So Feral is out. When is Feral out? Is Feral out next week? 27th?
Who cares? It comes out on the 27th.
Yeah.
Local Man Bad Girls comes out on the 27th. And then the next week, Local Man Volume 2 comes out.
Okay.
And then the week after that, Uncanny Valley comes out. I
Nice.
think in that order. And also this week, Army of Darkness #6 with me and Justin comes out. So yeah, it's through this summer, through most of this year, it's going to be almost every week, which is daunting.
Yeah.
But I've got a bunch of this stuff done already. I've set all this stuff up, and now I just got to keep, I just cannot miss any of the steps, or I will fall down all of them.
Nice. Well, look, man, we hope you don't Peter Griffin yourself
No,
out. And,
I hope not too.
but nah, I'll be sure I'll reach back out as some of this stuff unfolds so we can have more conversation about it, man. But
Yeah, for sure. It was very nice talking to you. Like I said, I've been watching your stuff since before this podcast part, just when it was reviews. I watched your whole, nerd room come together. It feels like a nice cap on this thing, right? I went to the promised land myself and saw it. I saw BJ and the Kicks.
right. I appreciate it, man. This has been cool.
Yeah,
So
man.
yeah, you're welcome back anytime.
Awesome.
And
Thanks for having me.
thank you for doing it.